Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. We usually talk about in our podcast really incredible educational topics. And this one is incredible, yet a little more serious and almost taboo. I feel like this topic we hear about on Law and Order episodes, and that's about it. And I think that's part of the problem.
Oh, I think you're right. But today we are going to dig into this, as our guest calls it, wicked problem. Our guest today is Ashlie Bryant, and she is from the Three Strands Global Foundation. And our topic today is human trafficking. You know, I was on the plane yesterday, and in the bathroom is the little sign that says, as I look at that, I think, I don't know very much about this. What
Mhm.
could this all entail? And so I am really excited to have this conversation today because I have a feeling I'm not the only one out there that
Yeah.
doesn't know a lot about human trafficking. And Ashlie can definitely shed some light on that for us. So welcome, Ashlie. We are so
Okay.
happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you
I,
so much, Jerri and Jamie. It's so nice to be here. I'm so glad to join you both.
yes, I thought you might want to start out with telling us a little bit about your foundation and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Three Strands Global Foundation. We're a nonprofit that has been focused on preventing human trafficking through education and employment for the last almost 14 years. Our programs are nationwide across the United States and in Canada as well. And you actually bring up a really good point that human trafficking is, Jamie, as you say, often taboo. It is a wicked problem. It is thought of as an impossible problem to solve, and many times people bury their heads. But it is a really important problem to address, especially when we know it is happening in all of our zip codes across the United States. And so I think that alone gives us the opportunity to be able to have the conversation and dig deep into what it is and what it isn't so that we can actually do something about it.
Actually, that's so true. I live in Kansas, and you would think Kansas, we're in the middle of the US, no human trafficking. I was in shock when a high school principal told us that we did have it right here in our schools. I couldn't believe it. So I think what we need to do first is define what is human trafficking.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jerry. And I think that's right. So human trafficking is defined actually globally as both commercial sexual exploitation, or what we call sex trafficking, and forced labor trafficking. So in the United States and around the world, we really track both those two components of human trafficking. And the other piece that's really important as we think about sex trafficking or labor trafficking is the things that make us understand why or how would someone be prosecuted for this crime. And there are three words that help us sort of get to that place of, is this sex trafficking or forced labor? And those are coercion and force and fraud. So if there is coercion, if there is force, or if there is fraud, and there is commercial sexual exploitation, and with those three, or forced labor, then it is a crime of human trafficking. And I think the reason that it is hard to define sometimes for people to understand, because the word coercion is a hard thing to sort of a nut to crack if you think about it. Like, what really is coercion? If as one student once said to me, well, if I have my younger sister, I tell her she'll get a piece of candy if she goes up and gets my slippers. Is that coercion? Right? It's a sort of a long continuum. And so, but coercion and fraud and force are those three components that law enforcement look for in a crime of human trafficking. So hopefully that helps. When we think about it, it's this umbrella of human trafficking and then forced labor or commercial sex.
Okay, that helps. That makes sense. So those are the two basic examples of human trafficking. And this might be a technical question, but when we talk about law enforcement, you just mentioned that. Are there two separate entities that look into human trafficking and enforce that? And or are they, is that all under the same?
Yeah, it's a
Does it
great
matter?
question, Jamie. So we have our local law enforcement, we have the FBI. Every state has state laws
Okay.
around human trafficking. And so a prosecutor could hold a criminal accountable to a state law or federal laws, because there are federal laws as well. So there are examples in the work that we do with the clients we call our survivor clients that we work with, that are actually testifying against their traffickers. And it
Mm.
could be that there is a federal case, or it could also be a state and local case as well. So it really
Right.
depends on the prosecutor, but law enforcement, the FBI, as well as HHS, as well as the DOJ, all of our federal agencies have a piece of combating trafficking in some way, shape, or form.
So you bring education around this to schools. And I think that's so fantastic because, as we mentioned before, no one really understands it. No one, it's this, see, obviously it's kept very secret. That's how people can be abducted, because it's very covert, right? And not out in the open. Um, but we have to protect ourselves, our children. Um, how did you get involved in this? What is the type of education that you bring to students? And what grade levels? And how does it help?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually the agency began 14 years ago this May, actually. And the story goes back to 2008. My good friend's daughter, 17 years old in high school, was hanging out with a bunch of other high school kids, actually in a sleepy suburb of Sacramento. There are about 20 or 30 kids hanging out, and they're befriended by an attractive young man who kind of worked the crowd. And what he was trying to do is figure out who was most vulnerable in the crowd. And as he asked questions of the students and got to know them a little bit, he was an acquaintance. He knew some of the kids in town, they knew him, but they didn't know that he was a human trafficker. But the questions that he was asking were to figure out who was the most vulnerable. And unfortunately, my friend's daughter was the most vulnerable in the crowd. And so after hours of hanging out and socializing, he offered to take a bunch of the kids home in his Hummer. And they piled in the Hummer, and he one by one dropped them off at their homes until my friend's daughter was the last one in the car. And when she passed her house and she said, "Hey, you just passed my house," he told her that he had other plans for her. And then he took her back to his family's house where he was living at the time. And then he sold her on Craigslist to a violent trafficker in the Bay Area, who held her and sold her 15 to 20 times a day to men
Right.
who were seeking to have sex with minors, before she was recovered by law enforcement and then brought back to our sleepy suburb. So that really, yeah, so that story, I was, my career it was in marketing communications. And as I sat around my kitchen table with my good friend, and we unpacked, just like I was sharing with you today, what is human trafficking and how could
Mhm.
this have happened in our neighborhood, just not even a mile from my house?
Right.
We started to understand that this was a crime that happened actually across the United States and happened to lots of different kinds of people. And those who are vulnerable are what traffickers target first. But vulnerability can be in from one person to the next, could it happen to anyone, really, we talk about. So the trafficker was sentenced to 12 and a half years in federal prison. So it was a federal sentence. He served 10 of those 12 years and then was released in 2019. And
Oh,
my
God.
friend's daughter, she has had a rough road. It has not
Oh,
been an easy journey. And as a survivor, our survivors are amazing individuals who have an amazing capacity to thrive and succeed. We need to break down barriers. We need to make sure that they are recovered and that they are healed, so that they can live the lives of freedom that they were intended to live.
That's
I
short.
just really, really difficult. So difficult. It's funny because you said they try to seek out the most vulnerable, but ultimately, these survivors, I don't think vulnerable is a good word for them at all. It sounds like, to be able to come out of this and be strong enough to tell the stories, be strong enough to help in prevention by telling those stories. I mean, wow.
Yeah. Interesting to me because I would assume it probably took place in an area that uh, you wouldn't expect. It wasn't like, a high poverty area. The other thing is the kids, my mom always said, travel with a group. They were traveling with a group, they were
Mm,
all together. So some of the things that you're saying really surprised me that that's the
sure.
way it happens. What are some other misconceptions about human trafficking that we
Yeah,
should
Jerry.
know about?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I would say you talked about poverty. And so, one of the
Yeah.
things I had an opportunity to interview 65 men who had been convicted of murder, but had in some way, shape, or form had trafficking experience, whether that was in their
Sure.
lives or that was that they were a trafficker themselves. And the wonderful part of the conversation for us at Three Strands Global Foundation was understanding why and how did they pick the people, the
Yeah.
victims that they picked,
Yes.
right? So that
Yeah.
we could, in prevention, really look about how do we prevent this from happening, knowing from them what they were sharing with us. So to your question, you know, the vulnerability happens if someone is poor, if someone is homeless, if someone there's
Sure.
food scarcity, if there is abuse in the family or domestic violence, that makes someone more vulnerable potentially.
Mhm.
But if I'm someone who is seeking attention or love, or I have been bullied terribly, I'm also vulnerable, right? If I have had suicide ideation, or that also, or if I don't know my own value and worth, then I also am vulnerable. So traffickers share with me that any of those things are what they're seeking to figure out, those vulnerabilities, so that they can then deliver or give whomever that is, whoever is vulnerable, and that could be female or male or non-binary. It could be
Mhm.
someone who they actually say, this person is seeking love and I will be their love interest. Or this person is seeking out food and I will provide them food. Or they're seeking out shelter and I'll provide them a bed and a pillow to sleep on. Whatever that is, that trafficker meets that person where they're out and gives that to them, and maybe their best friend and the person who provides, and they feel safe and protected. And then it flips, right? And then they
Right.
say, hey, you know what? In order to make rent this week, we're going to have to do something because we were going to be back on the street. And if I've been homeless, I know what that's like. Right. And so then this person who now I trust and I may love and have a connection to, I might say, okay, well, what do we need to do? Well, got these guys, they'll pay us $100. All you have to do is sleep with them. Right. And then we'll get, $100 for each one, or $1,000 for each hour, whatever it is, the price that trafficker sets. And little by little, what happens is that individual, that survivor's mind becomes caged, right, in that
Okay.
space. And freedom is hard to get away from.
So this is a total psychological game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's not so much that not always that they are abducted and then sent away. There is a psychological stage here. And I guess that is to prevent that person from trying to leave. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely, Jamie. And that's super important because we often think of kidnapping or abduction,
Yeah.
and that actually is far less. What happened to
Okay.
my friend's daughter is actually more rare. What happens more usually is if our foster youth are vulnerable, and a trafficker knows if someone is in child welfare in the foster care system, that might be someone who doesn't understand their true value and worth in a way that I might pinpoint. And that's straight from the trafficker's voice to me during the time that I interviewed them. That, whether it's a drop-in center or residential care or it's a foster home, that trafficker knows that that might be a good person to target and pick to be able to traffic. So they are, the individuals I interviewed, it was really hard, but it was incredibly powerful from a prevention perspective,
Yeah.
because then we could implement into
Yeah.
our K-12 curriculum those things that would truly increase protective factors for these children. How do we increase resilience? How do we increase value and worth? What are the activities and the role play that our teachers and our counselors can be empowered to use in the classroom that then increases those protective factors so that if a trafficker online or in person thinks that this child is vulnerable, they'll remember these things that they've been taught,
Yes.
and that will be a protective ring around them.
Oh
So
my
many,
gosh.
so many things that bring me to more questions.
I know. And I want to hear about the curriculum. I think that's so important for us to really focus on. But
Sure.
Jerry has a question. I have a quick question before we leave the human trafficker. Is that person usually an individual or part of a larger group or single larger group or multiple larger groups? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So it could be an individual, right? It could be someone, and I will say as a tangential comment for a second, we can go back to that. There's familial trafficking in the United States. It actually happens more than
Ugh,
we actually know. And so a trafficker could be someone that's in your family. It could be someone that you know. It usually is someone you know. It's not a stranger. This isn't the movie Taken at all. That's a myth.
okay.
This is someone that someone has known. And it could be a group, it could be a gang. We know gangs that definitely are involved in human trafficking, and there are criminal enterprises that are involved in human trafficking as well. But I think it's important to think about this can happen at home, locally. It's important to be able to think about that. That's why prevention education is so important for us across the United States. And it can happen in gangs. It can happen in the criminal industry too. It could be any of those things, Jamie.
Before we go to the curriculum, I have one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned online, and you've been doing this work for over a decade. Has social media and online
Right.
contact added to this
Yeah.
problem?
Yeah, absolutely. It has. And it is the data that we're getting at Three Strands Global Foundation is sometimes it's not only shocking, but it takes my breath away. So we know from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children that this last year there were 32 million reports of CSAM. CSAM is child abuse sexual material. So whether that's used for sextortion, whether that's used for trafficking in some way, 32 million. In 2002, there were only 417 reports.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So that tells you exactly, Jerri, that the explosion of social media has made it so that our Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, they are the places where traffickers troll, right? They are
Sure.
looking for those individuals who are vulnerable, who put something out in the world like, my parents are just, they don't give me the freedom that I want. I'm so frustrated. I'm
Right.
15 years old. I can almost drive. And all of a sudden, a trafficker, is able to see that and befriends that person and maybe even disguises themselves as another 15-year-old. And I'll meet you at the
Right.
school playground, or I'll meet you at the movies. And that person thinks and builds a relationship and trust with that person. And then the shame sets in. Now, how do I tell my friends and family? And if I've sent pictures to this person because I think they love me, now they use those as blackmail against me, and they'll send them to my family if I don't do what they say. And so this has just compounded the social media component into a place where it's even more important that prevention happens in the schools and with our teachers and our families. Our families need to also know, we have a curriculum for parents and communities so that they can know what to do as well.
So important. Well, that leads us to the curriculum. And you said it's K-12.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about that, because I think some people might say at first blush, what are you talking to kindergartners about sex trafficking?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
So I love talking about our curriculum so much. And here's the reason, because, 14 years of research, Three Strands is founded on research. Everything that we do has quantitative and qualitative data in order to know if we're on track or not, if the impact that we're actually making actually makes a difference. So when we talk about kindergarten, we have survivors. We have a whole nother side of the house that we actually have a direct services program where we serve survivors of human trafficking and place them into sustainable jobs. And we've placed over 900 survivors into sustainable jobs and education. So
That's a lot.
because of that data, we have the privilege and the honor of understanding the story behind the individual. And when was that individual abused in the home? And that happens when they're really little sometimes. Maybe they're 5 or 6 years old. Maybe as they are going home to a domestic violence situation or abuse situation, then from that, they're going to school, right? And if a teacher or counselor understands in the classroom that that might be happening, how can we make sure that our kindergartners understand what their inner voice is, which is the theme of our curriculum for kindergarten, and how and what does that inner voice tell them? It's their inner watchdog. And what about that inner watchdog makes me safe? And then as we go to fourth grade, so kindergarten through third is really about their inner voice and building activities for them about boundaries. We have an activity where the kindergartners and first graders can choose in the morning to greet their teacher and their teacher's aide with a wave or a fist bump or a hug or a no, thank you, I don't want to today. But we teach them that to say, whatever you feel like today, you greet your teacher how you feel, right? And give them the opportunity to know what a boundary is. So really from kindergarten to third, it's about inner voice and boundaries. Then from fourth grade to sixth grade, it's safe people, safe choices, and safe places. And this is helping them understand as an individual, they have this hula hoop and it's impressing upon them this boundary again, that there's a hula hoop around them. And whether they have actual hula hoops or they put their arms out as wide as a hula hoop, which is usually what it is. And we say that's a boundary around you. And you invite people into that space or not into that space. So if you want to be able to have a close friend that you trust, that you want to stay in that space, you have that space, great. Or if mom or a dad or a grandparent or a caregiver or foster parent. But if that's someone that you don't, then you say, nope, that's outside the hula hoop. And we really do activities and role play to teachers and counselors to help them understand how to get those protective factors built. So that's really till sixth grade. And then in middle school, when federally, as you guys know, in classrooms, we start to talk about child abuse and both mental and physical and emotional abuse. Now we introduce human trafficking and that actual definition and what is human trafficking and how might that happen. And that actually happens in our middle school years. What is child abuse, sexual material, CSAM? What does it mean to be exploited online? What is forced labor? We talk about for the first time, forced labor, because we know that those folks who may have become citizens in the United States, who have immigrated from here, that they too may be forced and to work, and children who are going to school need to understand, okay, are my parents being forced to work without pay? And that's not okay. And who should I go to in school to tell that to? Who would be safe? And I've gone through my curriculum, so I know who are safe and trusted adults. In fact, one of the things I love is what are the characteristics of a trusted adult, right? Really helping them see and understand the characteristics that make a trusted adult. And if I'm a parent who's a trusted adult, as a child, I'll know those characteristics. If I'm a coach who's a trusted adult, I'll know those characteristics as a child. And then in 9th and 10th grade, that's the tool belt. We call it, really, it's the tools for how do I as a peer protect myself and my peers from human trafficking. So as we're talking about dating, we're talking about interacting with other students, how do I make sure that my resilience is high and that I protect my peers as well as myself? And then we also talk about getting jobs and what are fair wages, so that no one is exploited from a labor perspective.
Right.
And then as you get into 11th and 12th grade, we're launching them out into the world to be those who look beyond their school, beyond their peers to the world. And how can they engage in combating human trafficking and be part of the solution? And what that might they do from an advocacy perspective, legislatively? How might they be students who create clubs at their school all the way through 12th grade?
There are so many avenues that you need to cover with this. And that's another reason why starting at kindergarten is so important, because because of your research with survivors, your research with human traffickers, you've been able to determine the deep levels of the root cause. And
That's right.
then from there, it's like almost, you've got that diagnosis and you're able to prevent because of that. So, I mean, it's really brilliant. And just, to address Jerri's question, it's completely appropriate and it is delicate and done so in that manner and done so, based on the age level. I think it's brilliant. And I love the advocacy component once they get to high school. Like, this is really, really amazing thing. So you've just been doing this, 14 years is a long time, but it's not. I mean, look at what you've grown here. And I love how you started with this, you had a wonderful career, but then you realized, no, this is a mission. I cannot just go to put my head on
That's
my
right.
pillow at night without addressing this.
Do schools around the country have this curriculum? Is it mandated?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Give
great
us
question,
some
Jerry. Yeah.
info about that.
So, what I love about this, we're almost at 1 million kids at Three Strands Global Foundation. The
Oh,
program is
great.
called Protect across the U.S.
Right.
And
Okay.
there are states that it is mandated. In fact, in 2017, Three Strands Global Foundation wrote the very first legislation across the United States that mandated prevention education in the state of California. The
Wow.
teachers were trained every single year, and that at least once in middle school and once in high school, students were educated. And then now 13 other states have followed suit and
Wow.
have different mandates. And some states like Florida has a K-12 mandate. Other states have mandates like Washington and Utah, like our mandate that's middle school and high school. The
Mhm.
thing that the mandates are missing, which we need to be advocates for and we continue to be, is that there's never funding attached, which is a bummer, right? So, and the
Mm.
reason for that is all of these mandates go out with a funding component, but then through the amendment and the legislative process, the funding gets pulled out. So when Three Strands Global Foundation goes to these schools, we often look for grants if a school can't afford it. But
Mhm.
there are different states that have buckets, as you very well know, where they can pull funding through either
Right.
buckets around character or safety that this
Right.
falls very beautifully in. So the
Right.
mandates do exist in about 13 different states across these states. And the Protect program, which is our program specifically, has reached almost 1 million kids and over 120,000 counselors and teachers.
Well,
That's
13 is
amazing.
a good start, but it's not enough.
Right.
Right.
The other thing I want to point out is you said some of them mandated one time in middle school and one time in high school that's not enough either.
Yeah, I
Right.
know.
Right.
It
And
just
that's
needs to flow right into the K-12 curriculum from my
that's
point
right.
of view.
Right.
And it's
Yeah,
more than sex trafficking, right? It's just building a student to have confidence in
yeah,
themselves and
that's right.
character. So many things. It's so much more.
And that, Jerry, is important because what we talk about is age appropriately. We need to
Yes.
build strong children. I love Frederick
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Douglass's quote that says it's easier to build strong children than repair broken men, right? That's one of my most
Yes.
favorite quotes by Frederick Douglass. And the reason for that is that's why our age appropriate curriculum, let's make sure, because the traffickers, Jerry, to your point, or Jamie, to your point, the traffickers know they're savvy. So let's make
Yeah.
sure that we have built these children with strong protective factors, with
Yes.
resilience, so that they know when someone online says something like, whoa, wait a second, this isn't someone who's a trusted person in my life, right? And they can just be able to, in fact, I have an example in a Protect curriculum for a high schooler, 14-year-old little boy who went through the curriculum with their teacher and was in the health class. That's where it was delivered. And after the curriculum, he started to feel like, I've been online with someone who I think might not be safe and trusted.
Wow.
And so in the PE class, which was the next class he went to, he told his PE teacher was a trusted adult. The PE teacher came back to the health teacher together with the counselor on campus. They addressed it. It was a 50-year-old man who had befriended him. They took care of making sure to keep that child safe, but all because that child went through that curriculum and the teacher
Yeah.
explained and the child knew, but intuitively that something wasn't right about that person online.
Yes.
Intuitively. And I think that protect component and building these strong young children, um, they are developing that intuition as well, I bet. And that gut feeling, it's so important. And teaching them about that is
Yep.
is really key. How do I'm assuming, yeah, some school officials may know about when you do events like this or podcasts. It becomes known. But do you also get a lot of like parent groups who are a part of this, who really try to initiate the infusion of this into the districts?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, so the parents are so important. And here's the
Hmm.
reason why, because those trusted adults that a child is going to choose almost always are their parents, right? So we actually have 6 different prevention education programs. Protect is one. And then we have a parent and community program. And
Okay.
that's really for parents and caregivers And so we offer that to the schools so that they can actually, so our Protect curriculum is taught by teachers and counselors, and that's from our research, right? We
Okay.
could go in and there are nonprofits that go in and teach in schools, but you leave, right? And we want the teachers who
Yeah.
see those kids every single
They
day
own it. Yeah.
to own it. And so we have a trainer of trainers, and we make sure that they are the ones who are making the Protect program go throughout the school campus, but also teaching parents, right? Making sure that on those days where they have parent awareness nights, that they're bringing this parent and caregiver training to the schools. So that also exists through the Protect program and through Three Strands Global Foundation. And then we also have law enforcement training, juvenile justice, as well as we have social services and government victim services training. There are lots of different other programs. People can go to our website to threestrandsglobalfoundation.org. And it's the number 3, not the THREE. And hopefully you guys can put that up on the link too. So yeah, they can see it. But, I think that it's really important for us to look at when we want to combat trafficking, we have to do it from the community perspective, right? We need, and part of the Protect program also includes a protocol. We sit with our leadership in schools to make sure that they have a protocol specifically for human trafficking, so that a teacher knows that protocol and knows what is their responsibility, even above and beyond mandated reporting. What is my responsibility if I see something in the classroom? If I watch the exchange between 2 students and one student's talking about this relationship online and how it's been so great, and I also know that the grades have been dipping for that student, then what is my responsibility and what's the conversation that I should have with that student to make sure that I, as the teacher, report that something is not going on right with that student, right?
Right. Yes.
That
And
protocol.
teachers see those little nuances to know that something's different. Something's, they get really quiet or they are acting out.
Well, and one of the things that we've done, just this last year, we partnered with a company in Germany, and we have 37,000 qualitative stories from our teachers and our counselors. We took all that data, which would take us years to read, and we, with this company in Germany, used natural language processing and AI to look for 3 things: behavior change in our teachers and our counselors, increased knowledge in our teachers and counselors, and increased awareness. And with a 96.3% confidence level, 70% of our teachers said that their behavior changed in their classrooms and with their interaction with their students based on the training when they understood what they should be looking for as it related to human trafficking, which is huge, right?
That's exactly right.
Absolutely. So I'm assuming you have trainers, but then I guess you mentioned you do like a train the trainer model for people within the district. Do you have a separate type of training for counselors than you do for teachers, and then separate for administrators? Because administrators ultimately, to build that culture, that's so important for them to be involved as well.
Yeah, so I love that question, Jamie, because we actually have an online, it's 101 to 103. And we did focus groups with teachers, counselors, administrators for years, still do actually, so that we can understand how do we meet them where they're at, right? Not overwhelm them. So we have anywhere from, depending on the state, 60 minutes to 90 minutes of that training that goes through the entire district for administrators, for counselors, for teachers, for bus drivers, for yard duty staff, for cafeteria staff. Everybody goes through 101 to 103. And then our trainer of trainers goes directly for counselors and teachers, those who are actually interacting with the students or interacting with other peer teachers, right? So that they can then teach each other or teach the students in the classroom. And that trainer of trainers can be done in person. So we can Three Strands can come in person, or we can do that virtually online, depending on what the student or the teachers and the district wants, which allows us to scale, right? The 101 to 103 is easy. We use our platform that scales through the entire district. And then the taught allows us to go deep with counselors and do role play with teachers. And that can be done either virtually or it can be done in person. Like this week, actually, we're in Laredo, Texas with our districts there, making sure that our teachers and counselors have that taught so that they can actually reach thousands and thousands of students.
Oh, this is so great. How can people, if their state doesn't have this, how can we start to advocate?
Yeah. So one of the things this week, actually the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be in the state of Washington advocating. I'm going to be also in Washington, D.C. and New York. And what we need is for parents and community members to go to their superintendents and to say, we need this PROTECT program, this Three Strands Global Foundation PROTECT program in our schools. We can no longer, like we started this conversation, put our heads in the sand. Human trafficking is happening across this nation.
Right.
We need to protect our students, and we need to make sure they're safe and that they're empowered to be able to understand how to protect themselves. So they can go onto Three Strands Global Foundation website, click on Protect. They can go directly to us and act. We have 41 staff across the nation who actually can respond and be able to help them get this into their districts. At the state level, we need to advocate for mandates, but we need funding behind that, right? We need it so that our districts, that they have the money that they need. And then for our corporations, if our districts don't have the money, we need our corporations, Amazons of the world, the Facebooks and Meta of the world, for corporations to step in and say, we're going to cover a district. We're going to do it because it means that much to have our students protected.
Right. 100%. Absolutely. Oh, that is the best avenue for sure, especially since in some cases, the social media is a pipeline.
That's
traffickers, right?
That's right.
So,
yeah. And right now, we have 5 bills federally that Three Strands has been advocating for. I'm happy to send all 5 of those to you. But there are different senators and Congress members who have been advocating for us federally to have bills where stopping child sexual abuse material, stop CSAM. That's Senator Blackburn in Tennessee. We have Chris Smith's office, Congressman Smith in New Jersey, who has long for 20 years been an advocate for protection of our youth in schools. And we have the reauthorization of the trafficking in persons legislation that is there. So many different Congressman Jackson in Texas, lots of them who are pushing this legislation forward. But we need to be able to call our Congress members and our senators and say, this is important. We need this legislation to get passed. And then I'll send those 5 bills so that the listeners can call their members and say, this is important for me, and we want legislation to get passed in the space.
Yes. So this is a call to action right here, right now. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. It's just, I have chills talking about this, not just because it's so fearful, but also just your passion and the work that you've put into this. You're saving so many lives, and not only saving lives, but also building children up. So that way this is not going to happen.
That's right. And you know what I want to say, Jamie, because here's the thing. We know, especially you both, administrators want to protect children, but sometimes in schools, there's so many things to do and so much on their plate that we at Three Strands Global Foundation want to make this easy. And so we want to encourage superintendents who are listening and administrators who are listening. We want to help in this space. We want to make this easy. We want to make this onboarding easy as possible for you so that students are protected. And we know you've got so much on your plate, so let us help you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ashlie, thank you so much. We're going to take all of your resources that you're providing, and they are going to be in the show notes. So everyone, please check that out. And we'll make sure that we are sharing this in all different channels so that it's, because you packaged it so nicely. You've given the background information that everyone has questions on, raised that important awareness, but then also shed light on the curriculum and how it really is so beautifully spread out across the grade levels to build these empowered young people who can protect themselves and then ultimately become advocates as well, perhaps. And just you're saving lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate the conversation and the questions and the engagement. It means so much to me and everybody at Three Strands Global Foundation and all the schools that have already using the PROTECT program. Thank you so much for advocating for this and for advocating for our youth. It means a lot.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.